Hi guys, welcome back. We're here to continue Phantasma by Kaylie Smith, and I'm super excited. Welcome back. We are on chapter 18, Burning Question. If you hear my cat, I'm sorry. She's in my room, but hopefully you won't. By the time Ophelia changed out of her bloody ensemble and into something fresh, there were about 2 hours left before dinner was served and the next level began. While she stripped off her ruined garments in the bathroom, Blackwell had made her list out all the places she had already been in the manor, and she'd make the mistake of mentioning the terrifying passageway. Now she was reluctantly watching him move the chair she had used to barricade the bookcase so they could access the secret door behind it. "Are you going to need me to hold your hand while we walk through?" he taunted over her shoulder with a smirk. "Oh, bite me," she deadpanned. His smirk grew wider. "Is that an invitation?" She ignored his teasing and asked, "Why don't you just do your little disappearing act and transport us where we need to go? Or do you only pop into places that you're uninvited?" He gave her a pointed look now, a tad incensed. "I can only transport myself into places I've already physically been. Plus, traveling in and out of this corporeal plane is not as easy as I make it look. And it's certainly harder with a person in tow. I'm trying to conserve my energy for your next trial. Unless you've decided you'd rather take a stab at it solo." She rolled her eyes to the ceiling. "I cannot believe I'm stuck here dealing with a sarcastic ghost while my sister might be getting maimed. Is she that incapable of taking care of herself?" "No," Ophelia admitted. "In a lot of ways, Genevieve is much more capable than I am. I was alone with our mother a lot growing up while she was out. But it seems like she became infatuated with this place for some reason, collecting newspaper clippings from all the cities the competition has traveled to over the last few years. I worry she was too enhanced with the prospect of the prize being able to fix all of our problems and didn't think through the consequences of coming here." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "And it wouldn't? Fix all your problems, I mean. Paying off the debt we have, sure. Fixing everything else in our lives, doubtful. It wouldn't make our mother's death any easier, or fix our fighting. She knew she was probably oversharing, but aside from Genevieve, she'd never had anyone to open up to. And though Blackwell wasn't exactly her first choice, he was her only option at the moment. Besides, she was going to milk this blood bargain for all it's worth. "When did your mother pass?" She stared at him for a lingering moment, trying to gauge if his curiosity was genuine. "About 5 days ago now," she shared. He didn't pry any further, and a moment later he'd opened the secret passageway. "So, the disappearing room was through here?" "Yes," she swallowed as she peered into the darkness, half expecting the demonic creature from before to come flying out. "It should still be there, right?" Blackwell shrugged. "The manor moves its rooms around for its haunts and traps all the time. If you found it and nothing happened to you inside, it was definitely by accident. So, explain the haunt system." She crossed her arms. "Is there a custom plan for each contestant? Do you have a ghost secretary in the back keeping track of the schedule?" "No secretary," he told her as Poe suddenly reappeared, rubbing his furry head against Blackwell's leg. "Just devils, ghosts, and Phantasma itself. The manor has a mind of its own, if you haven't noticed. It chooses when to manifest its guests' greatest fears and enlists apparitions and ghosts for help, or ghouls for help. But the devils coordinate other haunts as they get bored, and if none of that drives people out, the levels and other contestants take care of the rest." "Right," she muttered, as Blackwell shooed the cat into the dark with his foot. "Who is in charge, then?" "Only the devils know, and they've been sworn to secrecy. The only other beings to meet the Creator are the contestants who complete level 8 and win the bid to enter level 9. "What bid?" she asked. "If there is more than one contestant that completes level 8 and survives the night to get to level 9, they must either eliminate each other until only one person remains, or offer the highest bid to enter the level." She shuddered at the thought of the death matches that must ensue when too many people make it that far. She couldn't imagine killing someone else just to have a shot at meeting the monster who created this place. Blackwell walked over to the wooden dresser in her room and grabbed 2 unlit candles from one of the drawers, snapping his fingers and igniting the wicks as he handed one to her. "Ready?" She gave a tense nod, blood running cold as her body begged her not to go back through the demonic passage. But she refused to let that fear take over. She stepped through the doorway and raised her candle to the shadows, making extra sure the creature from the other night was nowhere to be seen. A shiver ran down her spine at the memory. Something wrong? Blackwell asked, a glint of amusement in his green eyes as he watched her pause. No, she told him before he could tease her anymore. The look on his face said doubtful, but she ignored it, changing the subject. If you are not one of the ghosts who perform the haunts, how did you end up trapped here? That, he said, is the burning question, isn't it? Blackwell let her lead the way, staying close on her heels as they walked down the corridor, one of his hands lightly resting atop her shoulder to assure her of his presence. She must have been unconvincing in her nonchalance about re-entering the dark passage, and she found herself touched by the considerate gesture. As they moved, the flame of her candle danced higher, throwing her shadow onto the stone walls. His silhouette was notably missing. The only reality I can recall has been here in Phantasma, he divulged, the words smooth and even, as if he had recited this many times before. I have no memories of how I got here or why I can do as I please, but the other ghosts can't. The only routine I know is making my bargain with contestants, watching them fail, then waiting for Phantasma to move to another city so I can find somewhere new when the next competition begins. Over and over. Other ghosts are tied here because they died within these walls or made poor bargains with the devil in their past lives and have to stay until their debts are fulfilled and they can pass on. Some aren't successful, and over time they become the ghouls Phantasma uses for haunts. What happened to all the other contestants who failed your bargain? She whispered. Very few died, if that's what you're getting at, he assured. A lot of them forfeited, but most of them have won Phantasma. She looked over her shoulder at him. They won their prize, but you won a decade of their life. His green eyes met hers with no hint of remorse. Exactly. If they were smart, they would have just asked to dissolve their blood bargain, she thought. But now that such a prospect occurred to her, she wondered if that's what she'd waste her own devil's grant on if she won. 10 years of her life back, or anything she wanted in the world. Was it hard to watch the ones who died? She paused her stride to face him, her head tilting with curiosity. I don't think I could stomach such a thing over and over again. Being too compassionate in a place like this is a mistake, he warned. Soft hearts don't survive here. What kind of hearts do? He leaned down until their eyes were level. Hearts with teeth. He reached out and gently gripped her chin in his hand, rubbing the pad of his thumb across her full bottom lip. She was frozen in place. Come on, Angel, show me your teeth. Her breath became shallow at his proximity, so close that she could see the firelight reflected in his emerald irises. Her eyes flicked down to his mouth, and like her brief lapse of control in the bathtub the night before, she wondered what it would be like to kiss him. Would he taste like the notes of vanilla and tobacco that lingered in the air around him? Would his ghostly nature make it feel cold? Blackwell's lips began to curl up at the ends, and she realized she had been staring at him, silent, for just a little too long. He huffed a deep laugh and reached for something behind her, his lips dipping even closer to hers as he leaned over. She turned her head to the side and swallowed. When she glanced behind her, she saw that they had made it to the end of the corridor. He pushed on the door's lever and let it swing open. Look, he waved a hand at what they'd found, a glint of satisfaction still shining in his eyes. A regular broom closet. Poe meowed at their feet, and Ophelia jumped in surprise, having forgotten about the feline. When she spun around to investigate the open doorway, she saw that Blackwell was right. It was just a broom closet. Maybe I have to be the one who opens it, she said, voice a little too thick, as she pulled the door shut again. She didn't wait more than a second before pushing it back open, and a noise of disappointment hummed in her throat when it still hadn't changed. Take your time, Blackwell asserted. Imagine the place you want to go in your mind first, then open it. She gave him a skeptical look, but shut the door a second time and closed her eyes in concentration. This time she pictured the plain hidden room, the long tables that had sat in its center, and the bare shelves that had lined the walls. She recalled Poe hopping up onto one of those tables to bathe himself and silently judge her. A creak echoed in front of her, and then, Ophelia, She blinked her eyes open and her jaw went slack as she took in the new room before them. Blackwell gave her an appraising look. Nice job, Angel. Now let's see what else you can find. Chapter 19, Ambiance. An hour and a half later, and they had already searched 3 different places top to bottom for any sort of key or clues that might trigger Blackwell's memory as to its whereabouts, all to no avail. The plain room at the end of the secret corridor hadn't had much to look at, so it was easy to rule out. The next place Blackwell suggested had been a drinking parlor, complete with a stock bar and a hair-raising chill. Did you only bring me here so you could get a drink? She accused. Of course not, he had told her right before knocking back an entire glass of amber liquid in 2 gulps. I brought you here for the romantic ambiance. The room had been slathered in cobwebs and grime. The final place Blackwell had suggested was the library. The massive room was covered wall to wall in dark oak bookcases that were stuffed with novels and journals. In the center of the back wall of shelves was an enormous brick fireplace, a gilded oculus mounted above its intricately carved mantel. It smelled like charred earth and old books and was much less drafty than the rest of the manor. Blackwell was lying back over a chartreuse chase in the sitting area before the burning hearth, and after digging through 2 of the bookshelves by herself, Ophelia was ready to throttle the phantom. While he had his nose stuck in some old fairy tale, she was choking on dusk, pulling out tome after tome, and checking to see if any might be hiding hollowed-out spaces for stowing objects such as keys. Does anything here feel familiar to you at all? She threw at him after another coughing fit. Maybe, he said as he flicked his gaze leisurely over the book she currently held, a thick encyclopedia wrapped in distressed brown leather and embossed with gold foil. Maybe not. That was it. She chucked the tome at his head with all her might. He switched into his non-corporeal state a second before the projectile would have smashed into his face. How unsatisfying. When he solidified himself once more, there was a lazy smirk on his face. If you want to play rough, he drawled, I have better games we can play, ones that involve less clothing. Ugh, she groaned, fist balling out at her sides. No wonder no one has ever been able to find what you're looking for. You're impossible to work with. Have you ever thought that just maybe I've already looked through all of this before? I'd remember if anyone had ever found anything of interest in these books. Would you? Because you didn't even remember you met me and told me about it. That's because I met you before the competition, which has never happened before. So you can remember everything within the competition, but nothing that you do in between, she realized. The way he'd made sure to ask if their first encounter was agreeable suddenly made sense. Correct. She threw her hands up. Then why are we in here getting my dress covered in dust? He blinked out suddenly and reappeared right in front of her, making her startled. Boo, he grinned. Oh, I'm so glad to see that's a habit of yours, she said, tone dripping in sarcasm. He gently pried the next book she'd been ready to launch at his head from her grip, discarding it to the floor as he explained. I chose you because you have been able to see and find things none of the others could, but right now you're still looking on the surface. I need you to dig deeper. Would it torture you to speak plainly for once? He reached out and placed a hand against the frame of the bookshelf at her back. Something you need to understand, if our partnership is going to work, we are on the same side. I want you to be successful more than you do, I promise. You found the Whispering Gate and you made that room in the secret passage appear just fine. That's what I mean when I say dig deeper. Find things I haven't looked through a million times already. Look beyond the books, the obvious. Fine, I get it. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to ignore the way every time he got this close to her, it sent her pulse into such a frenzy. The only thing she could hear in her head was the roar of her own heartbeat. In the meantime, it would be helpful if you made yourself useful in some way. Perhaps helping me get to know you? It seems when I find these places by accident, it's because something inside me needs to at that exact moment in time. I need to feel connected to whatever it is I'm looking for. Blackwell tilted his head. All right, what would you like to know? She looked him square in the eyes. What's your earliest memory of being here? Do you remember ever existing anywhere else? He contemplated her question for a moment, tapping his fingers against the shelf above her head as he searched through his memory. Once, twice, she reached backward and tapped her finger against the shelf to complete the trifecta he had started. His green eyes tracked the gesture, but he didn't bother to comment on it. He only answered, "No, there is no before in my mind. I remember every contestant I've worked with and every city we've traveled to, but nothing outside of Phantasma's competitions. A shame, too. I feel robbed of my first time laying eyes on you." Heat bloomed on her cheeks as a ripple of butterflies went through her stomach. He was too charming for her own good. What if... She cleared her throat. "What if you died in Phantasma?" She pressed on. "Maybe you were a contestant at one point, and that's why you're tied here?" "I've thought of that possibility," he nodded, his expression turning morose. "But a lot of apparitions who are here were contestants who died in the competition. Yet, I become a phantom rather than a regular apparition. Thankfully, the bargains I'm able to make ensure I don't become a ghoul." "Phantoms can be created in several different ways," she told him. "Most often they are created when an immortal dies and does not pass over. Something about the power of an immortal soul creates a stronger type of ghost. But there are definitely other ways, too. Especially because immortals didn't die often, given the fact that they never aged and were semi-invincible. But still, it wasn't impossible, and she wondered if something of the sort was at play here. Unfortunately, phantoms were elusive enough that her necromancy studies hadn't taught her much more about the subject than that. She wasn't sure her mother had even met one. He said thoughtfully. "Perhaps that is it. I was an immortal in my past life. A vampire, maybe. I do like to bite." He clacked his teeth together in demonstration before giving her a wink. She made a noise of surprise, her cheeks heating at the prospect of his teeth sinking into her skin. He grinned at her involuntary blush with satisfaction. She quickly changed the subject. "Maybe we should just start with the basics. What's your favorite color?" He lifted a brow at the mundane question, but reached out with a hand that wasn't propping him up and tugged at the tail of the velvet ribbon tied in her hair. "Red." The ribbon perfectly matched the rest of her ensemble, a high-collared scarlet chemist with the long gossamer sleeves that puffed at her shoulders and tapered, then flared at her wrists beneath the black velvet corset. "That's at least one thing we have in common," she noted. "Do you have a favorite book?" "There's a book here about a doctor who uses a bunch of different dead bodies to create his very own monster. I enjoyed that one." She straightened up with excitement. "I know that book." Before she could finish her thought, someone else blinked into the room, humming a tune reminiscent of the jazzy melodies one might hear in the French Quarter. It was the man who had let her into Phantasma. His top hat had black-lined eyes, unmistakable. His song paused when he noticed the two of them. "Blackwell!" The man dipped his chin in greeting to the phantom, but his shrewd eyes stayed on her. Blackwell straightened himself away from her, crossing his arms over his chest as he gave the other man a measured look. "Good evening, Jasper." Jasper removed his top hat and set it down on the table. Ophelia swallowed a gasp. The hat had been hiding a third eye embedded on his forehead. A devil's mark. Jasper gave her a knowing grin. "I wouldn't have pegged you as Blackwell's first choice. What did you do to get his attention?" He flicked his gaze over to Blackwell now. "Or is this one of those rounds where you just pick the prettiest contestants and hope that you get to ravage them in dark corners?" "Jasper," Blackwell murmured, a hostile edge between his smooth tone. "Get lost." "Sorry, handsome," Jasper shook his head. "No can do. Why don't the two of you rip each other's clothes off elsewhere?" Ophelia's entire body flushed at the suggestion. "We aren't... That's not... Don't tell me he hasn't even kissed you yet," Jasper flicked his eyes between them. "Taking it slow this time, Blackwell." Blackwell didn't deign to answer, the look on his face somewhere between bored and irritated. "There have been a few past contestants he made a deal with that damn near broke Phantasma's cardinal rule for our handsome friend here," Jasper continued. "Might want to mind your heart around him, or the trials won't be the worst that'll happen to you." "Let's go," Blackwell told her, gesturing with his head for her to follow him out. She eyed Jasper wearily as she went, and the devil's third eye winked open. The third eye wasn't the same warm brown color as his other two, but a bright gold, and the way it homed in on her face sent a shiver down her spine. She rushed out of the library and down the hall after Blackwell. Back in her bedroom, she could tell that Blackwell was tense, though he was trying to pretend otherwise. After a few beats of silence, she finally said, "Is kissing usually part of your bargains? Am I just not your type?" Blackwell froze for a moment. Then he tilted his head back and let out a deep laugh. "I have no type," he told her with a pointed look, turning to face her fully. Jasper was just keeping up his habit of being a pain in the ass. "There's only one contestant I've kissed in recent memory, and that's because they were a dreadfully dull conversationalist and absolutely horrid at searching. There weren't a lot of options for me that round. I figured we might as well do something to pass the time." "I suppose I should really start thinking of more interesting topics of conversations then," she told him. "Is the thought of kissing me that horrible?" he murmured. "No." "Yes," she answered. "Did you know that every time you lie, your left eye twitches a little?" She crossed her arms. "It does not." Blackwell opened her mouth to say something else, but the dinner bell tolled through the manor. A glint of something she couldn't name sparkled in his eyes. "I suppose we'll have to table this argument for later," he said as he went over to open the door for her. "Better hurry so you can get something to eat before level 2 begins. Once you're in the trial, you need to make sure to summon me so I can guide you out of it." As she shuffled past him in the doorway, she asked, "Do you know which circle of hell this one will be based on?" Blackwell pulled the door shut behind them, and then brought his mouth down to her ear to whisper a single spine-tingling word. Lust. Level 2. Chapter 20. Lust. Before the shiver finished running through Ophelia's body, Blackwell was gone. It wasn't until she stepped into the dining hall that she remembered the 2 mortal enemies she'd made less than 24 hours ago. The moment she passed through the archway, every single contestant snapped their head in her direction, and it all came roaring back to her. Blackwell and his blood bargain had distracted her from the memories of the nightmarish serpent, the spiders, the knife plunging into her transparent chest. She wondered to what extent Cade had sensualized his version of events. "Here we go," someone in the back muttered. It was the older man, James. "Do you think she's really a demon?" a young woman with golden hair and severe eyebrows wondered aloud. "Didn't she complete the first level? Look at her eyes. They're fucking creepy. I wouldn't be surprised at all if she's one of those hauntings." The tow-headed man next to her commented. He was unusually tall. His hunched posture made almost painful to look at. Ophelia wondered if he and the girl with the eyebrows were related, noting the resemblance and familiarity they seemed to have with one another. "Demon," Cade spat, scraping his chair out from the table with an ear-splitting screech. The rest of the room fell silent as Cade and Beau stood from their self-appointed spots at the head of the table and took a threatening step toward her. Ophelia didn't cower. She didn't care what any of these people who would most likely be dead in just a few more days, thought about her. They could take their insults to their graves. Instead, she fixed a sultry smile on her face. "I'm so glad to see you both made it through the night." Her eyes flicked over to Beau. "I was concerned you might have drowned in your own vomit." Eric let out a low whistle in the back of the room. Cade and Beau charged at her. She stood her ground as they came closer. "You both look as if you should be carrying torches and pitchforks. Honestly, if I rile you up this much, the ghosts in the manor must be having an absolute ball haunting the two of you." With lightning speed, Cade reached out and slapped her clean across the face. Her head snapped to the side, and she stumbled back in shock. A choked gasp came from someone to her right, Lucy. "Cade!" the girl exclaimed, expression aghast. "Shut up, Lucinda," Cade growled. Lucy obeyed, her expression pained. Ophelia's face was tingling from the assault, but a sharper stab of pain was pulsing from the corner of her bottom lip. She reached up and gently brushed the new split in her mouth, bright red blood coming away on her fingertips. A laugh bubbled up in her throat. Beau sucked in a breath. "She's bleeding." "Yes, she's bleeding," Charlotte pushed out of the crowd, a look at disgust on her face at the entire spectacle. "Which means she's not a fucking demon or a ghost." "You don't understand. She disappeared," Kate insisted to the group. Her blood is red, James pointed out, tone firm. She might not be entirely human, but she's immortal, just as the rest of us are. Leave her alone. Cade's jaw clenched at the admonishment. The grin slowly spreading over Ophelia's face must have been terrifying given the way Beau paled. He was definitely the sheep in this situation, Cade the wolf. Blood dribbled from the slice in her lip and down her chin as her smile tore the gash wider, but she didn't bother to wipe it away as she spoke. If either of you had a brain, you'd have realized that believing me when I said I wasn't a demon would have been a lot less risky than making me an enemy. She felt a sense of pride at the strength of her words. It might have been mostly bravado, but they don't know that. Cade didn't bother with the retort as he gestured for Beau to follow him and returned to their spot at the table, his eyes shining with a level of malice no other being had ever had for her before. The rest of dinner was awkward, to say the least. Hold on, I need a... Ugh, my throat got dry. Okay. Ophelia didn't eat anything. She stood alone in the back of the room and counted those who were left, making a mental file of their names and features. 20 contestants, including herself. That meant 6 people didn't make it past the first level. She wondered how many of those 6 had forfeited and how many had died in the labyrinth. When the lights flickered out a few minutes later, there was almost a collective sigh of relief. Almost. Welcome to Level 2, a sultry voice announced as the devil made her entrance. A curling cloud of red smoke caressed its way through the room, the powerful scent of Louisiana magnolias arriving with it. The devil had bright scarlet hair and warm ivory skin. Her voluptuous body was draped in black silk that left little to the imagination, and Ophelia was pretty sure a few of the contestants had drool hanging from their mouths at the sight. Ophelia subconsciously whipped the back of her hand over her own mouth to make sure she wasn't drooling as well. My name is Dreama, the devil declared. My specialty is lust. Someone coughed. Someone else made a lewd comment. Dreama whipped her head toward the source of the comment, and the rest of the room followed suit. The devil stalked toward the contestant. It was the tow-headed man. As Dreama slinked up to him, Ophelia made out something twitching behind the devil from beneath her silk dress. A tail. Quite a creative mouth you have, Dreama purred to the man. I think I find you more pleasing without it, though. Everyone watched with bated breath as the devil reached out and waved her perfectly manicured hand in front of the man's face. It took everyone a second, including him, to understand what she had done. But when the realization hit, the piercing scream of the girl next to him was so loud, Ophelia swore one of the glasses on the table shattered. His mouth had completely disappeared. He tried to scream, but it was a choke, muffled sound. His hands flew to his face, clawing at the grotesquely blank space where his lips once were. Dreama addressed the rest of the room with a sinister smile. Let this be a lesson to not give in to your lust so easily, or your ability to speak won't be the only thing you lose. Now let's begin. As Zell had demonstrated for their first trial, the demons summoned a doorway to portal them into the level, and with a flick of her wrist, their clue began to etch itself into the door surface, same as before. In a realm of desire, illusions enthrall. Contestants beware, lest you succumb to their call. Amongst the lustful voices, you must pick only one. When the first bell tolls, the trial has begun. Before the 4th chime, the truth you must find, and the key to your freedom beneath the bed lies. Dreama began calling out names, while Ophelia recited the clues to herself over and over. Most of it meant nothing to her, but one thing that stood out was the part about the tolling bell. She had a sinking feeling that this trial had a time limit. As members of her group passed through the portal one by one, the man who disturbingly parted ways with his ability to speak was still writhing on the ground in tears, broken, smothered sobs nearly choking him. Ophelia had to admit she felt sorry for him, if only because she thought such a fate should have been Cade's instead. What a dream to never have to hear that man talk again. Edna, Dreama called out. The girl kneeling by the crying man's side looked up, gnawing on her lip, unsure. Now or never, Dreama snapped. Edna swallowed and stood, whispering, You have to get up, Mason. We have to win. Think about Michael. With that, Edna walked to the door and, with only a single glance back, stepped through. The devil called out a few more names and then finally, Ophelia. Ophelia was disappointed that she wouldn't get to see if Mason rallied the courage to get up or not, but she didn't waste any time stalking toward the door. She was ready to get this over with. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the dark portal. This time when Ophelia stepped out of the portal, she didn't find herself in a labyrinth of nothingness. No, this time he had transported her to the most opulent display of debauchery she had ever seen. The walls were draped floor to ceiling in swaths of black silk, the plush carpet beneath her feet littered with what looked to be precious gemstones of all colors and shapes. Circular beds dressed in black satin sheets and scattered with more of the loose jewels took up most of the space throughout the enormous room. Couples and trios in ornate masks writhed atop them, the air flushed with heat and sweat. The lighting was dim, the only illumination coming from piles of lit black candles surrounding the beds. For a moment, Ophelia worried one of the lust-fueled partiers would knock them over and set the room ablaze. The heady erotica on display around her was the most sensual thing she'd ever witnessed. When she tried to look away from it, glancing up, she saw that mirrors covered every inch of the ceiling above her, making it impossible to avoid the salacious acts around her. Men feasting between their partners' legs, making their backs arch with pleasure. Women hoisting themselves atop their lovers and riding them with abandon, rolling their hips while their partners spoke the filthiest words Ophelia had ever heard strung together. A part of her was darkly fascinated. What would it be like to have someone so enraptured with you that they forget everything else around them? Not to be embarrassed to speak every unfiltered thought with reckless abandon. Drink? Someone asked her. She turned to see a waiter, face covered with a raven mask, holding a tray of oddly colored drinks, each bubbling enticingly, red, green, blue, pink, or gold. Pick your poison, the waiter urged, as a cacophony of moans vibrated through the room. She hesitated. What will it do? Depends, they answered, but you have about one more minute to choose before you're taken from this place. Taken? As in disqualified? They didn't bother with an answer, only shoved the tray of drinks closer to her face. She swallowed and chose the red one. That's my personal favorite, the waiter winked behind their mask. Cheers. Ophelia peered down at the effervescent drink, as light and enticing as a glass of champagne. When she looked back at the room, she saw a fleet of waiters flooding through a door at the back, each holding a tray of the same red drinks she had chosen, handing one to each masked partier. The attendees toasted each other, sending a melody of clinks throughout the room. Here goes nothing, she muttered to herself as she brought the glass to her lips and drained its contents, every last drop. Somewhere in the room, a bell chimed. A bell. There's something I'm supposed to remember about a bell, she remembered faintly. But as quickly as the thought had entered her mind, it faded. Okay. We're going to stop there. So we left off on page 172. What do you guys think? This is going to be the spicy part. So we're a quarter of the way through. But what do you guys think is going to happen? I don't have any idea. Sorry, my throat it's really dry right now and it hurts. I think I'm coming down with something probably. But thank you guys for being here, and I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.